Hello, this is Bill Butler. Mike Cody and I decided some time ago that we would videotape numbers of runners from the past as well as from the present and compile a history of running in Memphis. So today, our first sessions, I have from right to left, Don Lamb, John Keesee, and Richard Keesee. I'll start with Richard and let him tell us a little bit about his Memphis running bio. I'll go to John after that, and then Don after that. And then from there, we'll try to reminisce about running in Memphis in the heyday.
I'm Richard Keesee. I attended Memphis Catholic High School for Boys from 1964 to 1967. Was a half miler on up to my senior year, became a miler, ended up going to the University of Mississippi on a track scholarship, which is another complete unusual story, and ended up graduating from there, holding a number of school records, and found out that cross country was actually probably my best race, and ended up going back a couple of years later for graduate school and actually coaching cross country and track down at Ole Miss.
Good. John?
I'm John Keesee. I attended Memphis University School, also known as MUS. Was really mainly a football and basketball player, but Coach Jerry Peters recruited me to run track as a very slow 10th grader, and but eventually kind of grew into my body and became a decent track runner. Ran the 400, 200, 100, and long jump, decathlon, and then from there went to Rhodes College and ran track, long jump, triple jump, 100, 200, 400, relays, and that's about it.
The journeyman.
Yes.
Don?
And I'm Don Lamb, and I went to the old Tech High School, which is no longer in existence as a high school. Ran track there. I guess I was more of a late bloomer. I didn't do all that well in high school. I did qualify to go to the region, but I didn't qualify for the state. After I graduated from high school, I went to then Memphis State University and tried out for the track team as a walk-on and earned a scholarship. And so I became a sprinter, and I think I was the second highest point scorer for the 4 years I was there, always behind David Hathcock, the guy who was a real decathlete from Kingsbury. And he was multi-event and very, very good athlete, but he and I would always be neck and neck point wise in the meets. I ran the sprints, and I'd run the 100 and the 220 yards and the 440, or we'd kind of mix them up depending on what the competition was. And I'd always run the 440 relay and the mile relay, and so I was pretty active, but David was very active. And a little story about David. He was from Kingsbury High School, and he was a real good football player. And he started out at Memphis State to play football, and then he just decided to take up track full time, and he used up his 4 years of eligibility in track, but he had one semester of eligibility left. And so he played football that fall after we both, finished our eligibility on track. And he played football and was a defensive back, and he got drafted by the Green Bay Packers. And to show you how old I am and how old he is, he played in the first Super Bowl.
Oh, wow.
So that's kind of neat to, have had a teammate like that.
And this is, the time frame for you was 57 through 60 at
yeah, and then 61 through 65 at Memphis State. So
good. I guess we have really all three of y'all were sprinters in the sprint. I think you started as a sprinter, didn't you? or middle distance?
If I could sprint, I would be the SEC mile champion. My speed, leg speed is pitiful. I got more out of just grinding it out. Probably the fastest 2:20 I ever ran was 24.6. In college, I was lucky enough to end up with the mile indoor and outdoor record at Ole Miss, the 2-mile indoor and outdoor relay record, distance medley record, sprint medley records, and ended up making all SEC in cross country twice. And it was an unusual situation down there. Had the best cross country team, and actually started what they're finishing up or running into now. We ended up second in the conference, and we had never, the school had never won a cross country meet. They'd never beaten anybody until our team got in there. And so I was in high school, I played football. Wanted to, and I was probably a bit of a strangeness. I ended up lucky to be on 2 city championship football teams in starting, but I was the smallest nose guard / monster man in the city. I weighed 144 pounds, and that was very light even at that particular time in history. And so I liked football, but I realized my senior year that they didn't have a lot of 145-pound football players in college, and I wanted to do something in college, so I laid the hammer down in track, moved from the half mile to the mile, and ended up at Ole Miss and doing quite well as a distance man. I've always liked to run. I ran in grade school just for the heck of it.
In Memphis?
In Memphis. Went to St. Anne's Parochial School on Highland. We had an ex-football player from Memphis State, Chuck Michaelbelly, who came over and coached our Pee Wee football team, and then he organized a track team. And we had a playground that was rocks and cement, and probably a lap that was maybe 40 yards around was about all we could fit in there, and we held track meets. When we practiced hurdles, he ran us through everything, and I liked the half mile. That was the distance event then.
And the year framework there is?
1963.
Okay.
You couldn't get it, and they had 2 regular meets that year on tracks. One was the old Southwestern track, which was crushed brick and cinder, which was kind of fun to run on, and they had another one that was over at CBC out in the back there that was crushed brick, and those were the only 2 meets that we actually got on regular sized tracks to run. And so, the advice was, which we've always used for distance, just go out there and run and hang to your left.
Sort of like NASCAR.
Yeah, and I liked it. I enjoyed the competition. I liked the feel, what you felt like when you were running. And when I went to high school, I ended up on a really good high school track team. It had won the state championship a few years before, and that's something that these other 2 guys can talk to. It was so different then than it is now. You didn't have different divisions. It didn't matter if you had 8 people in your school or 800. You ran the same district, regional, and state. And they would take, out of a district, they would take the top 3 individuals, top 2 relay teams. Out of the region, they did the same thing. And when you got to state, it was a culling process. By the time you got there, if you got there, you'd already accomplished something.
And the school was integrated at this point.
Oh yeah. I played in one of the first integrated football games in the city. We played Father Bertrand. We ran at Melrose over in their stadium. We were more integrated than the other schools were. We had blacks on our team. We had some really good guys that came in, and participated in football and track. You go, and some of them are still running around Memphis now doing quite well. They all seem to have been very successful individuals.
John, you're private school,
Right.
and all the way through?
All the way through. PDS, MUS.
When did you start running? You're
A little bit of track in junior high. And then, like I said, Coach Peters essentially said, hey, why don't you come out for track? It'll get you
But
in
you were a
shape.
football player.
Football, basketball. Why don't you come out for track? It'll keep you in shape. And I kind of hemmed and hawed about it and didn't really want to do it. But how are you going to turn him down? So,
True.
so
And
that
later on, you actually coached over at MUS, didn't you?
that's right. I sure did.
I remember seeing you out at, I think, Max Simpson. I think you were still coaching when Max, Billy Simpson's son,
Yeah, sure.
went to school there.
Right.
And before that even, I would see you out there
Right.
when we would come over and borrow the track
Exactly.
to work out if the University of Memphis old track was busy.
Right.
Yeah.
It's funny, Richard, talking about the tracks. And of course, John, young guy that he is, you know, I guess all your competition was on the synthetic all-weather tracks.
No, I ran any number of track meets on cinders. Tiny Knee Stadium up at Ripley.
Oh, and Ripley, yeah.
5 laps to a mile.
Right. Plenty of track meets on cinders. But we did have one of the first synthetic tracks at MUS.
See, at Memphis State, the first all-weather track was built out at the fairgrounds, not where the track is now, but over across from where the Coliseum is located.
Zip and Pippin you looked at.
Yeah, and I think that was 1963, and that was when they were building the Coliseum and they were building the Liberty Bowl. And
63?
Yeah, and we were, and I think they were ready in 64.
They were. That was
I know the
first
Liberty Bowl was ready, and for the season of '65, that's when David Hathcock played there. And you know, we could see the construction going on. When we'd go work out on that track. But that was the first all-weather track.
Everybody went over there.
Yeah.
All the schools, public, private, to work out.
Yeah.
And the firemen would sit out there at the fire station and bet on us when you were running repeats.
Yeah.
You know, who was going to do this?
Yeah.
And I probably shouldn't say this. We weren't supposed to run on Sunday. Parochial school. We would go practice Sunday mornings after Mass. Go to church, have to go to practice, and we couldn't wear logos. You had to wear just a sweat top and whatnot. And our coach wasn't but 7 years older than us. We thought he was an old man, but we're 18 and he's 25. And he would put on a sweatsuit with us, and we'd all go out there. And it was voluntary, but the distance guys all showed up. Some of you sprinters were lazy, or we thought. That you didn't want to hurt bad enough, or didn't want to get nasty.
Yeah, I think most of us wanted to be, after working out in a distance, you looked at those guys and went, I think I'm going to do the field events next time.
Everybody wanted to. It was the guys that weren't fast enough that didn't get to do it.
Yeah.
Did you
run at Hodges Field?
Yeah, we ran at Tech. We didn't have a track,
right?
On our, at the facility. So we were like 2 blocks away from Hodges Field.
Which was on?
Which was, right there where the VA hospital is now.
Poplar Avenue.
And that was like, it was a football stadium, like Crump Stadium, but not,
right.
We didn't have the capacity, for
Mostly
attendance.
junior high school games were played there, although some high
Yeah, I
school
remember
games.
Bellevue and Fairview and all them played the football games. But a lot of the high school games were played there too. But that was a pretty good track. It was a cinder track.
Cinder track.
And
remember the cinders.
but if Hodges Field was being used, for a meet with other schools, then we would go over to your school, Southwestern, now Rhodes, and work out over there at Ferguson Field.
Right.
Did you ever run on the indoor track at the fairgrounds, John?
I did.
Did you?
I did too, yeah.
I'm sure you did, Richard. Yeah.
Loved it.
And those memories are, I'll mention that now to younger people out running, and they'll go, where?
Yeah.
So Liberty Land. I have to back up, and because they don't know anything about the fairgrounds, it's Liberty Land, and they're like, where is it? I said, no, it's gone.
Yeah,
Gone
now
for
are you,
decades.
now, did you run in the Coliseum? Because they had a few meets in the Coliseum.
In the Coliseum.
Well, on a wooden track, you know why?
I can kind of fill you in on a little bit of that. That's 1968, 69.
Right.
They had trouble with, they tore down one of the buildings and they were trying to find a place for that track.
Yeah.
They had it out at a hangar out at the airport for a while.
Yeah.
I think it's the same track, and then they moved it over there
Yeah.
and
They had-
ran a Liberty
yeah.
Bowl meet.
Yeah. And, all right, listen to this. Gerald Tinker with Memphis State tied the world record in the 50 at the
Indoor meet,
Coliseum at that indoor track meet. And Larry Wright was his coach, and you know, I remember that. And another world record, can y'all guess what that was? It was
Pole vault.
accomplished here. Pole vault, John
John
Pennell.
At the
Northeast
Civitan-
Louisiana,
Civitan
Civitan
meet.
Memphis relays in 63 or 64.
Probably 64.
Yeah, because I remember I was running and getting ready for the 880 relay, and I was on the opposite side of the track, and you know, they made the announcement that John Pennell was getting ready to attempt the world record, you know, 16.3.5 or something like that, which I can't remember. Was that the first fiberglass pole?
That's when they first started using them. And
Yeah, because
they
they had those steel poles before then, and you know, nobody could, you know, get anywhere close to that.
when they started the Civitan relays, it was a big time meet.
It was.
Jim Ryan came in, and I wanted to see him. I knew who he was. He's the first guy. Didn't hold the world's record then, but he'd gone under 4 minutes in high school in the mile. And I went out there to look at him, and he ran. I think he ran the 100 and a quarter mile because it was early, it was cold, and he was just warming up or training. And I'm going. He ran something like a 10-1 100 yards and a 49-second or so quarter mile. And I'm going, this is a miler, and this guy's what our sprinters are doing. And he was phenomenal. I was lucky enough to meet him a couple of times, and I wrangled a deal to get into a race with him, and I got the flu, and I always wanted to say that I was in a race with him, and I never got to. I got sick and just couldn't compete. But it was a different time. And cinders, and this is something else that people that haven't run on crushed brick or cinders really don't appreciate. We used big spikes, inch and a quarter.
Oh, yeah.
And people got laid open with them. They were razor sharp, and if somebody got in the wrong spot, you'd open up their calf or their foot or whatever. Going back, and there are all kinds of John Mahandro stories, which you'll hopefully get John in here at some point in time.
Hopefully.
He ran barefooted in the cover photo there. He's in that cross-country meet barefoot. And I came out there, and I'd never run.
That was at Audubon.
That picture was at Southwestern.
Oh, it was.
At Rhodes, yeah.
Rhodes,
it was when it was Southwestern. And I looked at that, and and I'm playing football, and everybody kind of used elbows and bit people and hit them and did whatever he had to play ball. And they said he ran barefooted, and I said, well, he won't with me. And so first time we got on a track later on, I talked to him. I said, you don't wear spikes, and you're not going to finish the race. There's going to be stepping on you. And John was a phenomenal athlete. I was talking to Keesee here, and the stories that, and you need to get him in here, the stories that he can tell, if he will tell them, are really unusual. He's done some fascinating things.
Yep, he has that.
Going back to the tracks, the crushed brick, I liked. Ole Miss had a crushed brick track, and for distance running, your legs lasted longer. it wasn't as hard on them as the synthetics. And the synthetics they have now are good, but when they called it flubber when they first did the Memphis track here. And they laid down an asphalt base that was about 2 or 3 inches thick, and then the flubber was probably a 1/4 of an inch to 1/2 an inch thick, and it was hard if you pounded on it all the time. You ended up with really bad shin splints. But it was you went through the evolution of shoes. I never had a wedged trainer until I was sophomore or junior in college. We used to wear what you called rubber ducks that were horrendous little shoes. They came in the same width. These were your trainers, and you ended up, if you didn't have shin splints, you just weren't running.
Mm-hmm. So I guess the only one of you who didn't graduate into distance is Don. You stayed.
No, he's running. John
I know, and both of them evolved into distance. You do, John too, and Richard both became distance runners.
Oh, yeah.
You're the only one who stuck with the sprints.
Yeah.
And we would come to the University of Memphis track, and those of us who were trudging around out there, running endless quarters to see if we could run a marathon under 3 hours, would watch, someone like Don and Taryn Wright. I saw Taryn a couple of times, who would come out of not out of blocks, but just out of the start, like silk. The rest of us were laboring to stand up starts. You guys at MUS had the best equipment that we could tell.
Yes.
Anything y'all really needed was there for you. Some of the better athletes you guys put out when you were around them were?
Track.
Yeah.
Well, we had actually some great hurdlers, Steve Keltner, Pierce Jones, who were also great long jumpers. Keltner, I know, held the state long jump record for many, many years. We had a slew of shot putters and discus throwers who Haynes McBride, Wiley O'Neill, John Rimmers, Rick Sneed, who would go 1, 2, 3 in every event, could throw the thing up way over 50 feet. And we had 3 guys, you were lucky to have 1. We would have 3 or 4, all due to Coach Peters and Chalice McMillan, who was coaching track back then. When
did you leave coaching?
About 8 years ago, 10 years ago. So I did it a long time.
Yeah, you were there 20 years, I guess?
Well, I didn't stay at MUS the whole time.
Right. Okay.
Actually did a stint at St. Mary's, did a stint at Fraser High School, Woodland Presbyterian School.
A diverse teaching and coaching assignment. Looking at athletes now, the equipment, technology is so much better. You were talking about the shoes. When I came along, the first running shoes I had were Adidas tennis shoes. They were Country Gentlemen, I think they were called. They were leather, high tops, green and white.
Italias. They were Adidas Italias.
Okay.
And they had 3 green stripes.
Right, 3 green stripes.
And they came out with an SL80.
Oh, yeah.
That was a tough shoe. But they were not padded well still.
Bud Joyner had a virtual monopoly on them.
He did.
At his little shop on New York Street. I remember he sold me probably 5 pair over the course of 3 or 4 years there. And I finally went over one day and went in his office back there, and he had so many boxes of them left over, and odd sizes, 14s and 5s. I said, what you ought to do is get some slip covers and make couches out of them so people will be comfortable when they come in your shop over here. Bud's shop on New York was actually just a little house you came in and he had boxes of shoes.
I've often said that Bud Joyner, had he wanted to, could have made $1 billion and been the Phil Knight of the South. He just didn't.
He loved it.
He didn't want to go big time, but he could have.
Yeah.
Because he was the first guy. He's the first guy to sell New Balance. I remember when New Balance came out. these blue things with a big N on the side. And then I got my first waffle trainers, Nike waffle trainers.
Absolutely.
From Bud. But, it was kind of you'd go over there and you have to kind of find it yourself.
You remember the chest of drawers he had that if you said, I need a pair of shorts, he'd go, third drawer.
Well, he really, give Bud credit for what he is. He's really the kind of the father of running in Memphis, in that he went to Central. He was a sprinter and morphed into a distance man after he got out of school. But he would help anybody that needed anything. And he sold those SL80s out of his house for many years until he finally ran out.
Yeah, I think, he had
I worked for him for a summer.
inventory of 'em. Yeah.
He helped me. I had a Sports Afoot out at Park Place Mall for a number of years, and he helped me set it up. He helped me, he was still at the time on New York getting ready to close it and move, but he gave me dummies for and helped me set up the displays. And Bud, you can't say enough about him as far as being interested in running and what he does. And he's still out there.
Still
He's that
today.
Bud Mile every summer and still
For
competes
most of
in it.
us that were really concentrating on distance, to have an all-comers meet at Southwestern Roads that would be sponsored by Bud.
By
And
Bud.
all you would do would be come out and sign up for whatever events you wanted to run. If you wanted to run them all, he was more than happy to accommodate you from the 100 to the mile.
Yeah.
And he still promotes it to this
He loves running.
Yes, he does. I was telling somebody today that he qualifies each year at the Bud Mile, which is held at Rhodes on the track, for All-American status. Every year, there's as he ages, the times are somewhat slower, but he continues to train to run that time so that he qualifies and becomes, and I think 6 or 7, 8 years in a row now, he's achieved All-American status. Some of us, I told whoever this was, and they were like, I can't believe it. I could be an All-American. Well, age group.
Age rated, but no, that's
age
great.
rated.
And he knows everybody and remembers everybody and treats everybody, whether they're really good or not so good, just the same.
Absolutely.
He's really a good guy to anybody that runs.
I worked for him too for a brief period.
Yeah.
On New York Street, on Poplar, and then put me in charge of his outlet store out on Covington Pike. And
I bet you didn't know he had one in Germantown at one point in time for a Christmas season.
a Christmas season.
Yeah, there were a lot of running stores popping up back in those. Phidippides, remember that one?
Sure.
Steve
Over in Summer
Bledsoe.
Avenue.
Steve Bledsoe. And,
Steve Bledsoe. That's where I met Steve.
yeah.
A running place, Freeman Marr's place out on Highland.
That's another instrumental man in Memphis running who was he was open to everybody and intelligent and not demanding. He just helped.
Was he your coach at Rhodes or Southwestern? Who coached when you were there?
Bill Bretherick was the head coach, but Coach Marr, he would come over there every afternoon and work out himself.
Yeah.
I used to often wonder how he's able to do that at 3 in the afternoon.
Yeah.
But he was had his own law practice, so he could do what he wanted to do.
Judge in Bartlett.
And so he became a real mentor for me and a wonderful guy, and was just there all the time and worked the meets and was a great encouragement to me and many others.
His passing is really what motivated Mike to begin talking to me about doing this. We'd lost Jim Mathis, who I'm so sorry we didn't get him time in front of a camera too. His experiences over the years and being an All-American at age group related, and a world champion, I think.
Yeah, world champion in Masters.
So that's what kicked us off, is we wanted to retain these memories, and Mr. Marr helped me. Oddly enough, I know so many people he helped. He would, if you went in his store and you looked at something, he'd go, well, you just go ahead and take it and see if it works for you. Amazing man.
there are a number of people that have carried a lot of us to through track. They loved it. They had I guess a love to share it, and that kind of fits in, I guess, with us. I've got 5 children, and they don't like track. They were wrestlers, and some of them ran cross country, and some of them ran track, but they didn't like it. I loved it, and the people that I was around, like Bud and Coach, and I don't know whether to call him Coach or Judge Marr, they fostered it, and Mike Cody. They were always patting you on the back. They were glad to see you. They'd help you if you needed it. Bud and I went on I don't know what he called I'll have to ask him. He had a nickname for the circuit, but we would go and run in Bells, Tennessee, and we'd go and run in Grenada, Mississippi. And he'd find, it was before the internet, and he'd find these races, and we'd get in the car and drive down there and run a race and then come back home. And he was always, if you found one or if you didn't know where one was, he did. And it was fun.
Yeah, he was instrumental in keeping running going.
He kept it going.
And on top of the popularity in Memphis. And oddly enough, when Mike comes in to be taped, I'm sure he'll tell the story of Mr. Marr, Coach Marr, and how much he did for Mike. He would come, not being able to get out of Bartlett until late in the evening, and come over to Southwestern and hold a flashlight so Cody could work out and he could help Mike achieve what he needed to achieve. It's just remarkable what he would do for people.
Well, Southwestern was always very open to running. For some reason, they had a culture that they embraced it, and I'd go over there in high school to use their track during the summer, and they'd always let you, they wouldn't, well, you don't need to be on this track, you don't go to school here, or we don't know who you are. It was, you want to run? They let you run. They'd let you use their locker room to go in and change and shower. I'd get off from work. I worked at Hazel's Picture Frame Shop that was down Poplar Avenue, and I'd get off from there and go over to Rhodes and either run the track, the cross-country course around Rhodes, or Overton Park, and then go home. And they were always, they didn't know who I was, but they were always open to it.
It was open, fully open when you were a student there too, wasn't it? I don't think they'd fenced it off yet, had they?
Oh, no. No.
It was remarkable.
I'll tell you another guy that was very instrumental in the running community, and a very good friend of mine, Jack Rocket.
Oh, yeah.
When I first started coaching at MUS in '74, I'd be out there at the track, and here was this guy running around a track, and if you knew Jack, he would the entire time around
Thought
the
he was
track.
going to die.
And I'd go, who is this guy? And what is he doing? And but eventually got to know him. His son ran cross country and track for me, and he was just the greatest guy, and would do anything for anyone in the running community. And he anything I needed for cross country or track, he paid for it out of his pocket if I couldn't get it at MUS, which
Absolutely.
and Jack was just a wonderful, wonderful man. And if I'm not mistaken, he died running out in the mountains of Colorado.
Right, at altitude.
Yeah.
I think he'd been at a conference in California and had flown back to their cabin in the Rockies, I think, or at Colorado mountains, and had flown in that day, and then immediately told his wife he was going to the track to do a little run, and when they found him, it was too late.
But I don't know if you guys agree with the real distance running boom, i.e. 10K, marathons, all that business, as far as I'm concerned, started when Frank Shorter won the Munich Marathon in '72, which I happened to be at.
Really? Wow.
I am literally sitting in my dorm room at Rhodes College, and my dad calls me out of the blue one afternoon and says, hey, what would you think about going to Munich? Yeah, sure, Dad. I'm blowing it off. He goes, no, really. You think you could get somebody to go with you? And I said, well, are you serious? Yeah, I'm serious. And so I turned to my roommate, Todd Robbins, and said, hey, Todd, you want to go to Munich? Yeah, sure. So we both were there when Shorter wins the marathon
Wow.
and Waddle wins the 800
Wow.
with the ball cap on and all that, who later became admissions director at Rhodes. And that's really when Americans started getting interested in 10Ks, which were prevalent back in those days, and marathons. And I had never dreamed of running a marathon. I mean, I was a 400-meter guy. And Steve Bledsoe and Hunter Humphreys ran the New York Marathon in '77. And Hunter was a great friend of mine. He said, come on, let's go do this in '78. And I said, come on, give me a break. I couldn't run 26 miles if you put a gun to my head. But, you know, I ended up training some and going out there. And my first marathon was a disaster in '78. New York, it's about 68 degrees, which is way too warm for me. And, but I got through there. And I don't know, about 3:30 and collapsed at the finish line. Not reality, but my legs were, I was just done. But Shorter wins the marathon, and that's
Absolutely.
really,
That was big time. Jim Beatty, when I was in 8th grade, 9th grade, was a good American miler. He was a little barrel-chested guy. And everybody was flirting with the 4-minute mile. And I was fascinated by it, but I didn't want to run it. I wanted to run the half mile or I really wanted to be a sprinter, but I wasn't fast enough. But those guys set the tone. And then you had, you know, Jim Ryan breaking 4 minutes as a high schooler. Were you guys at the Christian Brothers track a couple of weeks ago?
No, I was out of town, but I heard about that. That was fantastic.
That was exciting. It was just, and I got a tip of the hat to Nick Dwyer for getting all that set up. Nick was one of my cross-country boys. I coached cross-country over at Christian Brothers for 10 years, and he was one of the good kids that came out of there that was outstanding. But he set that up, and it was so thrilling to finally see somebody here run under 4 minutes. I'm very grateful that I got to go over there and see it and sit on the infield and watch them. I ended up as a miler in college. Out of high school, they didn't have all the road races. They had the 5-mile classic at Overton Park. And somebody decided it was 5 miles. And we'd go over there and you'd run. That would be the only road race that they had, really. And you'd go run that during the summer. And sometimes, I'd take spikes and take the spikes out of them and tape the shoes so that you'd have the lightest shoe on you could have to run that race. And then people got interested in the road races with Shorter and some of the other guys that were actually running 5 and 10Ks. And it got to be pretty interesting. I was already, age-wise, I was past my peak, or I had a family, and I wasn't putting in the training, but I loved to get in them. I'd get in them and try to compete or run. And I've gone through a series of adjustments. I was going to quit running. I didn't want to run if I couldn't be in the top 5. And then I wasn't going to run if a high school kid beat me. And then I wasn't going to run if I got outrun by a female. And then it was finally, that baby being pushed by that pregnant woman there in that carriage. If I can stay with her, that's great. Let's go. So it does stay in you have some kind of a drive that's in your person that you want to run that. And if you don't like it, you can't have anybody force you to do it. They can't make you go out and run a decent 5K or 10K. You gotta want to. High school, we had, you were asking a little bit earlier, Bill, about people that were instrumental. We had a kid at Catholic that he won the Walter Stewart Memorial Trophy for football, and then he came back and set the state record in the quarter mile, Marty Schiller. Marty was killed in Vietnam. He was one of the nicest kids and best athletes. He graduated in 1964. wasn't a real big guy. He was 5'11" or so, maybe 155 or 60 pounds, but he was a super athlete. And so you had to set the state record in the state meet back in the day, and he did it. He ran a 49 flat, which was coming off of the gravel and Red Dog and cinder tracks and onto synthetic tracks. And so he was, I watched him, and he was a senior when I was a freshman. I was, wow, I want to be able to do something like that. And he was just, he was phenomenal. And then we had other quarter milers that were back in there between your time and mine, a kid by the name of Barry Reno that you ought to remember, but he came back and smashed the state record in the quarter mile. He was, I think he went to Fraser.
Yeah.
And there were kids. My senior year, we probably had arguably the 3 best milers at the same time in the city. Now, there are people that have run faster afterwards, but John Mahandro, myself, and Calvin Fleming, we had battle royals. I kid John. I beat him 4 out of 6 times that year. Unfortunately, he won the state. but Calvin is still a super runner. I saw him the other night at the run out at Christian Brothers. He's 68 years old, and he's still putting in very heavy mileage. And he was a quarter miler, a good quarter miler, and half miler, and miler.
Are you talking about Calvin Johnson?
What did I say?
Fleming.
Fleming. Excuse me. Go back and edit that out. Calvin Johnson. Calvin Fleming's another kid I ran with. Yeah. Thank you. That's a slip of the tongue. But Calvin was another really good runner at the same time. Now, we've had kids since that ran better times in high school, but I don't think we had 3 better milers or distance men or middle distance men than in 67, 68 in high school.
Don, talk a little bit about some of these great sprinters. Wasn't there a guy from Manassas named Willie Hurd? Do you remember him?
I do. And did he go to Notre Dame?
Went to Notre Dame.
Yeah, he was.
And if you can talk about any of those great sprinters, and just talk a little bit more about Coach Mathis, Jim Mathis.
Yeah, Jim was, he came to Memphis State as a baseball player, I believe. I think he was.
From Nashville.
Yeah, from Nashville, and that was the sport that he liked, appeared to like the most. And he.
Well, later on, he became all-world softball player.
That's right.
He ran track and was a good 440 guy, set the school record, and even ran some AAU meets after he graduated. In fact, I think he was like 7 years younger than me, and he would come out and work out with us at Memphis State, and we had some real competitive workouts, and so he was still in real good shape and running in those AAU meets. And then there was a kind of a lull, before Masters track meets and before the distance running craze and all that. And so he got back into softball and bulked up and started lifting weights. And he was a all-star in
it was a group that traveled,
softball, but then
Jim and another guy who was a hurdler. I'm sorry?
The track?
Yeah.
Dave Ellis was
Dave
one of
Ellis.
us.
Yeah, Dave Ellis.
Hurdler.
New Balance.
Yeah.
And
Prince tennis.
Yeah, Prince tennis. And there were a couple other guys. I think Freeman actually ran a few with him.
Freeman and Winston Wolf, one of your old Central High guys.
Winston was
he was a sprinter.
Kind of a
he was
thrower,
a decathlete.
too.
Yeah,
decathlete
he
kind of
won the state decathlon in 1960 for Central for the state. So, and then he went to Baylor, and I think he participated there a couple of years, and then I don't think he ended his.
Well, Winston
career.
hung out at Rhodes too when I was there.
Yeah.
And actually, the new track,
Track
is dedicated to Winston
to
Wolfe.
Winston, yeah.
That's right. I'm glad y'all have the better
Yeah.
memories. These things
But
float
you were
through.
talking about some of the old sprinters too. There was a guy, even before my time, if you can think that far back in history, a guy named John West at
Yeah.
East High School.
West
And
District.
What about Peter Pettit?
Peter
Christian
Pettit,
Brothers.
yeah,
Christian
Christian
Brothers.
Brothers set the state 220 record, but John West, I think he went to LSU and then maybe ended up at a place called East Texas State, which I'm not quite sure what the name of the school is now. But he was like a 9.4 100-yard sprinter, pretty good, on cinder tracks. So he was one of the early sprinters that I recall, and then there were William Hurd,
Maurice Knight
Maurice Knight,
was at Memphis State.
yeah.
Was a real good sprinter.
And who was the guy that was at Wooddale? See, Wooddale High School had some real good track teams with it. Coach O'Donnell, wasn't it?
W.S. Donald.
W.S. Donald. They had some great track teams. And they had one guy, and I forget his name right now, but he ran like a 9.300 back in those days. And I think that was on cinder tracks or whatever. So,
Remember, I used to talk like that real fast.
yeah. But he had some great teams. And of course, the forerunner to you at Catholic,
Larry
Wright.
Coach Wright's still around.
Oh,
He's kicking.
He had some great teams and won a state championship.
He won it really primarily with field events. He had
And a lot of depth too, because he had a big team. Because when I was maybe a junior, there was a whole influx of the entire senior class from Catholic High that became members of the Memphis
Don't
State
forget
team.
Jerry Peters at MUS, who founded the MUS Cross Country Invitational and the Track Invitational, and I know you ran in that. I'm sure.
I did.
And I remember Barry Reno running a 440 out there one day in about 48.9, And so Coach Peters had a lot to do with.
Somewhere I've got that clipping.
You do?
With those times. You know how they used to put all the little box scores in there all the times?
Yeah.
That was another motivator. I wanted to see my name this big in the newspaper. You like to see. You're going to look in there and see if you won something. They put in the dual meets and the triangular meets and then the invitationals. That MUS Invitational was the first really high school invitational in probably the region.
Yeah.
They started something up at Brownsville later on. You were talking about Tiny Need, but he set up all those little tracks in Humboldt and Brownsville and Ripley.
And this was in the mid-'60s?
Mid 60s on up through the early 70s. But in high school, you didn't have, you had to travel if you were going to invitationals. MUS had one that was local. And it's tough to put on a invitational on a regular track meet, much less an invitational. But they had that, and it was relatively early in the season. It wasn't still cold, but it was pretty early in the track season, and it lets you see where you stacked up against the rest of the.
Is there still an invitational at MUS?
No.
I didn't think so.
It's just all so different now with classifications and.
It's tougher to get everything together, and it costs a lot. Now there's so much time involved in putting on an invitational. I coached high school track at Christian Brothers, and I had somebody ask me, one of my friends I graduated from high school with, how I could do that, because Catholic and Christian Brothers were pretty much neck and neck back in the day. And I was as dedicated to Catholic High student and athlete as you could find. And I said, well, I sent 3 boys through school over at Christian Brothers because that was the best place for them at the time. And I said, and I put that purple on, but I'm still blue and white inside. And the toughest thing that I had to do over there was putting on the Horton, which was, it was just, you didn't have, and it was right at the start of computerized and everything, but you had to mail out all this stuff and invite teams and get addresses from phone books and whatnot, and you'd get all these things together, and you'd spend 2 months getting it ready and try to get some decent teams in here from West Plains, Missouri, or the Middle Tennessee or East Tennessee teams, so you could take a look at them in cross country. And it was just an undertaking that once it was done, my season was over. We'd get that thing taken care of the first week in October, and then from there on out, you concentrated on the region and the state meet. But it's a lot of work. You had to have parents that volunteered and people
Still
that were.
do.
Yeah. Bud would come out. He would be the starter. He'd bring his microphone and his gun, and it was just a lot of work for half an hour of.
It's evolved somewhat, but it's
still there.
huge
They've modified it.
undertaking. How has the technology changed for sprinting? Do you keep up with that?
Back when I was training and it was all pretty much just running, and in fact our coach at Memphis State wouldn't let us work out with weights. There was an old theory back then, you'd get muscle bound, if you worked out
Is
with
that
weights.
Glenn Johnson?
Yeah. And of course, now the sprinters, have all these, use all the technology, the new machines and the new workout regimens that, are just so totally different from what
MUS has a heck of a weight room
Yeah.
and program for all the athletes.
Yeah.
I'm sure track as well as.
Yeah, we had a great weight room, but it was for the football players, and so.
Did you guys ever get into nutrition in your day and time?
Not so much,
All right, this is what hit me when I went to Ole Miss, and we were on the training table with the football team, and it was all steaks and potatoes and heavy stuff. I went down a couple of years ago and toured their new facilities, and they have a dietitian who's designed a meal plan for all of the athletes. Each athlete gets a specific meal, and this is for so-and-so who's running sprints and according to his body. And they've mapped this all out, and they're fixing it, and I'm going, wow, it was like, I'm hungry, get me a roast beef sandwich back in the day, and just don't eat it right before you run.
Yeah.
And so they've come so far in the techniques and the nutrition that you do wonder what you might be able to do had you had that choice or that opportunity. And it's
John,
phenomenal.
Nutrition. I know you're now a CrossFit guy. You still run too, but
Yeah.
are you in a specific diet of any kind, or are you just
No.
eat what you?
I eat what I want.
I wonder.
Well, mine is, I've changed my lifestyle, and primarily because not so much about nutrition for running and working out and that sort of thing, but I've been involved with health insurance and all the stats that I hear about and read about, about your diet and your lifestyle is just so totally different from what we knew about 40, 50 years ago. And so I've changed mine significantly, and I've been able to keep my body weight same as when I was in college
Excellent.
running track, so.
I gained whatever you. It's interesting. Mike Cody is because of his cardiovascular problems has had to alter his diet for the last 7 years at least. And when I have lunch with him now, it's always a very vegetarian or fish and vegetable type meal that he'll order, and I always feel I have to go along with it, but I struggle sometimes to determine what I'm going to eat.
I read something. I read something about the University of Nebraska. This was a few years ago, and I guess Ole Miss has adopted a similar deal. They have
read the
nutritionists,
same
and they had, their cafeteria for all their athletes, and they had different numbers for different stations of types of foods, and the salads and all the
It's
protein.
unusual.
But they would calculate a number system, and each athlete, depending on their sport, would they would have to coordinate everything by the number system.
John,
Getting back a little to the running boom, and I mean, when I'm a sprinter, basketball player, and the idea of running a marathon was just so totally foreign. But once I did one, I said, well, if I'm going to keep doing this, there's only one thing for me, and that's Boston. And this is the only reason I kept doing it, because I didn't like them at all. I mean, I've never run a marathon that wasn't painful. And I think that's what, a lot of people have stayed in it. Boston is kind of the mecca, and if you think about it, it's one of the very few things that you and myself, if we can qualify, can run with world-class athletes. I can't go do that in the NFL or the NBA or anything else that I can think of, but you can qualify for the Boston Marathon, and to me, that was always the mecca, and it took me a good while to get there. But once I got there 2 or 3 times, and then that was it for me on marathons.
We were talking about Jack Rocket earlier. I have a photograph, I think Mike passed it along to me, a clipping photograph of Mike and Jack finishing, I believe, the Jackson Marathon. It might have been the Nashville Marathon. And it was Jack's first marathon, and Jack is probably 35 pounds overweight. And that's really why Jack started running, was weight control, and Mike sucked him into it. And then Boston became the magnet that just drew them. Of course, Mike had already been going there a couple of times, and after that, Jack had to go. And every year it would come up, they had to qualify, they had to go to Boston. To the point that when I first came into the running scene, distance running scene, I began to listen to those guys, and it was just like, bread and water. I absorbed every second of it. I had to go to Boston. It took a while, as you mentioned.
When I first was trying to qualify for my age group, you had to run under 250. Yep. And I can just remember going, I just don't think it's possible for me. I've got a full-time job, a family. But I kept at it and eventually got there. Now it's a little bit relaxed. I don't know, it's not as hard, but it was sub 250 is tough for me.
That's tough.
Real tough for me.
It's tough.
And Jack was a great inspiration, along with Coach Marr.
Can you imagine talking about maybe a sub 2 minute? 2 hour marathon?
And Bill, you will recall the legendary training runs at Shelby Forest with Mike Cody and Bill Craddock, and
They were races, 20-mile races.
You talk about pain.
Absolutely. No water.
No.
Unless it was a fountain working.
I've forgotten who else would be out there.
Pete Sharon. A couple of us, and I would come and string along behind them until I finally got to the point where I could run upward with the first 5 guys or so. And it was extremely painful. It was painful from October until the marathon, and then painful beyond that. I tried to explain to my youngest son when he indicated he wanted to get into running that it hurt. It hurt from the time you put your shoes on until you quit running, at whatever point in time that might be. Your mind has to accept the fact that it hurts. If you're going to get better, it has to absorb that hurt and turn it into a positive thing. But anyway, that's another philosophy. So,
no, that's exactly right. You want to see how badly you can feel without quitting, without stopping. And I don't think it matters whether you're world class or whether you're an average high school runner. If you're trying to compete, I've seen some kids that they just wouldn't run hard. But if you're trying to compete, you hurt. You're going to feel bad, and you're going to want to quit somewhere in that race. And that's what you train for, is to get past that. And it's physical and mental and somewhat spiritual. You just have to get past or learn to feel bad.
Well, I think, having the experience of running on powdered brick and cinders and in the early days of the new surfaces track is something that athletes, young athletes today, or even middle-aged athletes, have never known. And they don't know, when you show them a picture of Jim Ryan running as early, or any of the early guys breaking 4 minutes, those were on cinder tracks.
Banister.
You dug a little hole for your starting blocks.
Right. Yeah.
And it's the appreciation when you tell people that is, you see this incredulity in their faces. They just cannot believe that anybody would really do that. Chariots of Fire, I think, is an excellent movie for motivational for young kids, but it does show that kind of single-mindedness of purpose and usefulness of tools that are available.
And society is come to accept or realize or appreciate what runners do more so than they used to. And I don't know if you guys ever had this, but when I was in high school, if I went out, quote, to run some distance, inevitably somebody would roll down a window in a car and say, "Are you okay? Do you need something? Are you hurt?" And that went on all through, I ran a lot of distance my junior and senior year in high school, and then in college we ran all the time. We ran 2 or 3 times a day. And people would stop and ask you, "Do you need help? Where's your car?" And so there was they didn't know you were out running to get in shape or to train. It was odd. It was unusual. There was something wrong if you were out on the road making a loop. We're talking about Memphis, but let me go back to Oxford for a minute. When I got down there, now the head track coach was Doc Knight, but he was the head football trainer. He was the trainer for the basketball team and for the baseball team and everything else, and he was the track coach. Doc had been a world-class sprinter at the time of Chariots of Fire. He knew those guys. He knew Paddock and some of them. And he was not a slave driver. He was a nice fella, really good, mild guy. But he's working with the football team. We get down there for cross country, and if you were on scholarship, they got you in early. And they had hired a graduate student who had never seen a cross country meet to be our coach. And he was in biology or whatever, and my roommate was a junior college transfer, and we taught Coach Gray how to read a stopwatch. And I'd never run more than a mile and a half in a race, but my roommate had. And he coached us all through it, and we ended up winning our first SEC competition. The first time we'd ever beaten anybody, we beat Alabama. And then we didn't do well my freshman year, and freshmen were eligible. That was the first time they were eligible for varsity. And we didn't do well my freshman year, but my sophomore year we got second. And then we got third in the conference. And then they dropped the program. My senior year, I was pretty much by myself. We had a kind of a ragtag group. But they didn't pay attention. They didn't know what the training techniques were. And ours was, you just went out and you ran. And Coach Gray would say, "Well, I read a book about designing a cross-country course," and he designed the first course that I'd ever run on. I didn't know any better. He went out to the Oxford University golf course, and he made this course, and it was 4 miles at the time, that went straight up and down. And we ran on it every day. And then when we brought in Auburn and Alabama, they're going, "Oh my gosh, this is a crazy thing." And so we ended up finding that we were successful because we were running these Oxford hills. And UT was the standard at the time. And then in the Southwest Conference, it was Arkansas. We couldn't touch those guys, but we ended up doing quite well with the others and learning how to run, what to do. how to pace yourself, what to end up running as a pace. And so when I came back to Memphis, I wanted to run with all the guys that I knew, train with all the guys that and we did have that little cadre of friends all through college especially, where you got together, whether you went to Arkansas State or whether you were from University of Memphis or whether it was Memphis State or whether it was Rhodes. We got together and ran whenever we could during the summer. And I've still got really lifelong friends or really tight friendships. You may not see somebody for 5 or 10 years, and you run into them, you can pick up right where you left off.
Well,
It doesn't stop.
the classic, we were talking about the classic,
5 Mile Classic.
yeah, Overton Park 5 Mile Classic, the oldest foot race in Memphis. I've forgotten, this is maybe the 43rd or 44th or 45th year of it. But I haven't heard anything about it. Have you, John?
You know, I thought about it the other day because I ran it last year. And every year I always say, God, why don't they change the date of this thing? It's just awful. And about 2 or 3 years ago, Barry Robertson said, I think you're right. And I'm going to try to get it in October. I haven't heard anything about it this year. But before I forget, I want to also give credit to another longtime distance running supporter and runner in Memphis, Bill Levy. Bill was a long-time runner way back in the 70s. He used to run the New York Marathon.
Right.
I went up there with him and ran that. But the Ocall St. Jude run has been around forever, and he's just been a great, great supporter of running in this community and a great guy.
I have back to the classic, I have a photograph at home, I'm sure Mike will address it, of Mike Cody and John Mahundro running in the classic with some other guys, or maybe just before it became the classic. And John had convinced Mr. Cody that running barefoot was the way to do it. So they're both barefooted, and Mike's got on plaid Bermuda shorts.
When would you say the first one was, the first classic?
Oh, it was in Overton Park.
In the 70s?
No, it was before that.
Yeah, I think Shields Hood.
It was in the late 60s.
Yeah, late 60s, I think 68.
67, 68.
Was it 5 miles?
It was 5 Mile Classic, but the miles may have been run off then with a car.
Okay.
Right. Oh, I measured a few courses with Bud Joyner, who put me in the back of his Plymouth Duster with an engineer wheel and drove around a 25K course. Of course, you understand that the wheel comes up
Every so
often. So we think probably it might have been like 19K, not 25K.
But that was the only race they had for everybody in high school and college, and everybody in the area.
Well,
would
pretty
get into
soon
it.
after that, though, it was known originally as the Oldsmobile Thanksgiving
Right.
4-miler, which I still have a T-shirt from 1980. So I know it was in existence then, and at that time it was at Audubon Park.
Right. Then
It's moved around.
Was that the year they gave turkeys, frozen
Yeah,
turkeys?
you could get a turkey. Yeah.
You know, they don't do that anymore.
Yeah. Was that the race that?
And you put on the
I did the Memphis in May.
Memphis in May and
10K.
Blue Cross Blue Shield for years.
Yeah. And
I went to the first one of those.
that was downtown, and
Yeah.
Lined everybody
That's a
up.
big deal.
Bam.
yeah.
Yeah, I still have the
And,
popsicle stick.
you know,
they
and
gave me with my
we're thinking, about why did we start that race with them going down the hill on River?
I don't know,
Riverside?
I had
It's
a
like
great
like a
800.
bit. But was it the 5-miler that Frank Shorter came in,
Right.
I think so.
and
We had Craig Virgin.
it was going to be like 20 degrees or something like that?
Sat in the car.
And he didn't even have sweatpants on. He said, because he had been training out in Colorado in the mountains, and but he said that was the coldest he'd ever been because the air was so moist, and the combination.
Craig Virgin came in for a 10K. It was out in East Memphis, somewhere out there by Halley Stadium. Of course, there's no shade, and they ran that thing at like 12 noon for some reason, if I'm not mistaken. Of course, Craig Virgin was, all-world runner.
Yeah.
Cross country.
Well, did the heat bother you guys when you were younger, when you ran? I wanted it hot. And then
I never liked it.
I cannot tolerate it now.
We never ran long past May, you know, back in those days.
Sprinters and field event people hibernate.
I like the heat. I like to run. I had somebody stop me one day over at Rhodes and wanting to know why I was working out at 3:30, 4 o'clock, and it's 100 degrees. I said, because it feels good.
I would have asked you that myself.
It's nuts.
It's crazy, yeah.
Now I can't, go out in the backyard. I got to go back in the house.
As crazy as it sounds, and as crazy as I am, and Jim Mathis and Bob Alexander and were, training for masters track meets. And this must have been 10 or 12 years ago, and we worked out at the University of Memphis during that heat wave, and the temperature that they got up to 105 or something. And of course, it cooled down a little bit by 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock in the afternoon. But we were out there working out like
We didn't know any better.
we didn't know any better.
And they would tell you not to drink. Don't drink too much water. That was football practice all the way through track. You just a little bit of water.
Yeah, that was the deal
some
back
salt
when we were coming through.
Salt tablets.
Yeah, water for sissies.
Luckily, my high school coach got smart, and he would let us. You'd run a lap and you'd get a drink, and you'd run a lap and get a drink. But there were some other coaches that you don't need to drink. That's you're not tough.
Things have changed quite a bit.
Yeah, they have. Well, it's been about an hour and 10 minutes or 15 minutes or so, and I guess we probably need to wrap this one up. But anything you want to add to the taping of the history of Memphis running? I mean, I think it's an exciting idea, and hopefully we'll be able to see the finished product before any of us move on to the next level.
Well, I'm glad you're doing it. It's finally time. It's past time. And, we'll think of some interesting things that we could have or should have said, maybe catch them in a later interview. But
Absolutely.
Appreciate what you've done.
Well, thank you for doing it. I would say the most rewarding thing for me, going back to when I started all this distance running, it's just been the camaraderie and the friendships and the people that I've met. You don't meet guys and gals of bad character hardly that are runners, distance runners. It's just something about the sport that attracts good, solid people. That
Can't say the same for sprinters.
but it's just been a great journey to be with guys
Continues.
like you and Bill, and I've gotten to know your sons. But that's been the greatest thing.
Yeah, it's been great to see, over the decades, how things and people, have been involved, and there's been a lot of great people. And
Well, you find out that it is such a fraternity that you get the people that you meet. I hadn't seen Mike Cody for a while and saw him at the 4-minute mile, and it was just like yesterday. And other people, Bud Joyner, Calvin, all these people that you ran with or against or had some kind of a funny story with. You go back, and I remember the kids out of high school and the kids out of college, and then the adults afterwards so very fondly. It is a fun group. I may not agree with a lot of them on politics or something else, but when you're running, it's all fine. It's good.
I'm just really honored and flattered that Mike would charge me with this, and what's open for me is I've reestablished friendships and acquaintances from the past, and I began to think of people's faces and, as you say, events and the camaraderie that comes with it, and the ones who've gone, and how sad it is that we didn't do this earlier. We had talked about at one point in time having a written history, and I just refused to sit down and write it. I have enough gumption to know that my research capabilities are limited. I did write a booklet called Ultra Running History of Memphis, and that took about 2 years, and it's only 20 pages. So you might imagine that any history I would have written would have been, it was my Sistine Chapel. I never finished the ceiling in there. So anyway, it's a pleasure and a privilege to have you guys come in and be the first guinea pigs. And I look forward to the next groups that we have, and it's going to be ongoing. So you may I may be calling you back saying, hey, can you come in for another taping in October, November, December, January? Who knows how long this will go on. But thanks again for coming, and I'd like to thank WKNO and the studio folks here for helping us with this